JFrog is our platinum sponsor. We obviously appreciate their generous donation, for this year. You can check them out at jfrog.com. Azul is our silver sponsor. And of course, Azul is one of the downstream distributions of OpenJDK. We are partnered with DevNexus, and this is the annual conference that is held in Atlanta in the I think February, March timeframe. Of course, it was virtual this year. And if you had attended this, it was just amazing of what they had put together. So we were actually proud to be partnered with them. And then our per meeting sponsors, we have JetBrains, of course, who provide us the licenses to IntelliJ IDEA. And when we were using Crowdcast, that was actually offered by the Jakarta EE4 Java users groups. So what's new? Basically, the old JavaSig domain still exists. It's not doing the hosting. And what I put there is not 100% true. I do have the automated going from HTTP to HTTPS. And since we're not paying for the certificate on that, redirect, but if you use the HTTP, it will actually forward to our gsjug.org domain. And if you've been around the last couple of months, you've seen some of this here. Next month, we have two meetings. One is the Quarkus World Tour, and then the second one is the FUJE OpenJDK 17 plus JUG Tour. And we have, as you'll see later, we have a defined presentation for September 28th, and we're still working with Quarkus folks to get a presenter for that. So been reaching out to them to try to, see if we can get that taken care of sooner rather than later so we can advertise it. So stay tuned for that. And then, of course, this is me, and then that's, as you can see in the picture there. So without further ado, I'll introduce myself during the presentation. Okay. There we go. Okay. I'm not getting a mouse. What is going on here? Move this over here. Okay. Okay. So this is getting started with Jakarta NoSQL and MongoDB. I've been involved quite a bit in the Jakarta NoSQL specification since the beginning of the year. Those of you who were in attendance at the January meeting this year, you heard from Otavio Santana, who's the specification lead for Jakarta NoSQL. And so I've been, actually writing an application specifically for MongoDB, but I think at some point I'd like to expand that and have other databases too. And you'll see what I mean as we go along, especially with the example. So this is me. I work for Exxon Research, ExxonMobil Research and Engineering. That's what the petrochemical research organization is there. Long story behind that, but I've been with the company almost 32 years, and look forward to retiring in the next 2 to 3 years. And in my spare time, all my extracurricular activity is in the Java space. I'm now the lead Java Q news editor for InfoQ, and of course, the Garden State Java Group, which originally started out as ACG&J Java Users Group, we've been around now for 20 plus years. I'm also on the Leadership Council for the Jakarta EE Ambassadors, which originally was the Java EE Guardians around the time that Oracle was taking their time in getting Java EE 8 out. And this was going back to 2016, thereabouts. So this takes a lot of my time, but it's fun. It's what I really enjoy doing, and look forward to contributing a lot more. All right, so the objectives for tonight. We'll talk about what Jakarta NoSQL is, along with Eclipse JNoSQL. We'll discuss some NoSQL database types, look at the Jakarta NoSQL layers, and of course, a demo. And this is always a dangerous thing when you do these live demos, but since I've done these, around some of the other Java groups the last few months, hopefully everything should be seamless. And then some resources at the end, and basically talk about how you may want to get involved if you're interested. All right, so Jakarta NoSQL is one of the many, roughly 30 specifications on the Jakarta EE platform. And I wish I can ask people a question about if they know what Jakarta EE is relative to Java EE. I'll quickly say that Java EE8 was released in 2017. It was donated to the Eclipse Foundation for open source, but due to the Java brand name under Oracle, there had to be a new name now. And it was a community vote, and it was Jakarta EE as the new name. Along with that, a lot of the EE namespace that preceded with Java X had to be renamed to Jakarta. So Jakarta.servlet instead of Java X.servlet, that kind of thing. And that kind of took some time to all get accomplished. Jakarta EE8 came out about a year later in 2018, and that was a copy of Java EE8, but under now the open sourced Jakarta platform. Last year, Jakarta EE9 was released in December, and that was basically what they call the Big Bang. And there was a lot of debate about how to implement the Jakarta namespace. The question was, do you do it a little at a time? Do you do it all at once? And the Big Bang basically meant, let's do it all at once. And that's what wound up happening. More recently, Jakarta EE 9.1 was released. And basically, there was just some updates to some of the various specifications. Jakarta EE10 is slated to come out in the first quarter of next year. So that's a little bit of a history behind that. So this particular specification is not ready for prime time just yet. It's one of the specs, but it's not part of the what they call the platform or the web profile. And so, because this is the work in progress, and so I've been helping out with a few things, and if you're interested, you can too, and we can talk about that a little bit later. So this specification basically streamlines Java applications with NoSQL databases. There's a set of APIs that provide a standard implementation. And you'll see as we go along, there's a lot of relational databases, and just to make things a little bit easier for Java developers to get to work into this new space, into the NoSQL database. Also, it's known as a one API many databases because you can interact with a lot of the NoSQL databases. And one of the things is everybody's familiar with MongoDB, which I've been working with for the last I'd say since 2014. But there's so many more that you may not be aware, and I'll show you the list later. In the Jakarta EE world, Java groups are encouraged to adopt the specification. There's a small process on how to do that. And if you look on the specs, you'll see the jugs that have actually done that. And we joined that a few months ago. And so it's last I looked, it was us and the Sul Java down in Brazil had adopted this specification. Now, Eclipse JNoSQL, if you had seen any references to that, is basically the compatible implementation of the Jakarta NoSQL specification. So there's a defined set of APIs for each NoSQL database type, and we'll talk about those types in a bit. And you can, there are defined annotations to map Java objects, and there's a lot of, you can use the ones that are used in, say, JPA, for example. All right. So there's the same name, so it's something that's familiar to Java developers. So the database types, there's key value, column family, document, and graph. Now MongoDB falls into the document database type, so we'll talk about that. Column family and graph tend to be a little bit complex, and I'll be honest, I have not worked with them, but I'd like to learn a little bit more. In the key value world, there is a line going across from Apollo to Sun and Aries to War, etc. Basically is, a set of key value pairs. Right. And let's see. There we go. So this is the simplest of the database types itself. All right, and the client is allowed to, get the value for a particular key or assign a value and things of that nature. All right, the value can be any kind of type. It's or as a a binary large object or blob. It doesn't care what's in there. All right, as long as you can get to it. And because of this simplicity, there's excellent performance. And can be very easily scaled. The use cases in something like this is storing session data. You can maintain schemaless user profiles, and you can store user preferences as just some of the use cases for that. An example databases are Redis, MemCacheDB, and RIAK, R-I-A-K. I've worked with Redis in the past. That's quite some time ago. And these are tables to juxtapose what you would, what Java developers know in the relational database world, with table, row, column, and such, and then how they correspond into the NoSQL world. So a table is synonymous to a bucket and key value, and the row is a key value pair. Next is column family, and data is stored in cells grouped in columns of data rather than row. So obviously, hence the name. And columns are grouped into column families. And then column families are groups of similar data that are usually accessed together. And this has a main advantage over the relational database management systems, such that there's faster search, access, and data aggregation. And then the use cases in something like this is content management systems. Blogging platforms, for example, would use something like this, and applications that require a lot of write requests, for example. You'd want to avoid using this if you have a lot of complex queries, because as you can imagine, this looks pretty complex, as it were, in trying to access some of this data. An example databases are Cassandra, which I think a lot of us are familiar with that name, and then Hadoop, HBase by the Apache folks. And then in this table, or in this, in this table, a table is actually synonymous to a column family. A row is a column, and a column itself is a key value pair. So this one I think is the most complex to learn. Document database, if those of you who are familiar with JSON, the JavaScript object notation, this is an example right here, where you can have nested documents. For example, you have duty, which is an array embedded into the main document itself. So those of you who know JSON, this looks very familiar. And these, is used quite a bit, especially in MongoDB. All right. So and the document database is also similar to key value. All right. And and also the JSON document is also, it's a binary JSON, so it is streamed into a binary format for storing. Also similar to the column family database, querying this kind of database gets very, very complex as well. And I've worked with that. I have a MongoDB presentation with some examples on that, and it definitely, the syntax itself, getting all the parens, all the curly braces and everything in line can be very tedious sometimes. Use cases would be e-commerce applications and also content management systems. And of course, MongoDB is one of the document database types. Here, comparing it to RDBMS, a table is similar to a collection, and that's basically a single, the whole table itself. And then a row is a document, like the JSON document, and then a column is a key value pair. And to be honest, I don't know what that link means at the bottom there. This was from a website that I found that had a lot of documentation on that. So I'll be honest with you about that. And last but not least, you have the graph type. And, those of us who, have been through computer science classes, throughout the years, you remember graph theory, using nodes and edges and things like that. Well, this is very similar here. And this is known, built on top of what's an entity attribute value model. And this basically encodes in a space efficient manner entities where the number of attributes that can be used to describe them is potentially vast, but the number will actually apply to a given entity. And it's a flexible way to describe how data relates to other data. Use cases in this, which is kind of interesting: fraud detection, graph-based search, so similar to the computer science theory you had over the years, and even social networks. Example databases include Neo4j, ArongoDB, and OrientDB. And I've heard of all three of those. Have not worked with them though. So, and then here, comparing it to RDBMS, a table is a vertex or an edge, and a row is a vertex, and a column is a vertex and an edge property, and the relationship is an edge. So very, very, I don't know if anybody's out there worked with it. If you have, ping me, please. Maybe you can, provide some more information on how these things work. I would appreciate that. All right. If there's any questions in the chat, I'll take a quick 30-second break here just to see. And grab a little water. So sounds like there's no questions. All right, so moving along to the two different layers of Jakarta NoSQL. There's the communication and mapping layers. These were formerly known as Diana and Artemis. And interestingly, if you ever talk to Otavio Santana, he's big on mythology, and that's where these names originally came from. And his examples always talk about Roman gods and Greek gods and things like that. So that's actually pretty cool. So if you ever see references to older blog posts about Jakarta NoSQL in its earlier days, you may see references to those to the names Diana and Artemis. So basically, here's an example of how that all works. You have your data access objects on the top. You have your mapping and communication, and it's hard to see, but it says Artemis and Diana here. And then, of course, you have your 4 different database types right along the bottom. So that's how it all fits together. In the communication layer, it's a set of APIs, obviously, that defines communications with those NoSQL databases. Okay, and there's modules representing the 4 NoSQL database types. Now, with that, you'll see the package names are communication-core, communication-document, and so on. The only difference is that for graph, since there's been a well-defined communication layer for with Apache Tinkerpop, I think it's called, it's actually leveraging that technology. So you just have them for document, key value, and for column family. And what you can do is compare this to the JDBC APIs. If any of you who have worked with that in the past, so you can, it's essentially the same kind of idea there. The mapping layer obviously does the mapping, similar to everybody who's used Hibernate over the years, so that kind of thing. So this does the very similar thing. In this case, however, we're using they're using the existing Jakarta context and dependency injection specification, that's CDI, and the Jakarta bean validation specification together to wire all this together. Heavy use of annotations, which you'll see in the example application. And you can, compare this to JPA and the object relation model, ORM, in the relational database world. This is a graph, scalability as a function of complexity. And you can see that the key value, has the highest scalability, but because it's, it's very less complex, and it goes all the way down to graph being, the most complex, but the least scalable. And I was kind of surprised that document isn't switched with column, but that's according to documentation I've seen. So I mentioned earlier, there was a whole bunch of NoSQL databases, some of which I'm sure you're familiar with. Cassandra, there's Hazelcast. I've learned about Scilla within the past 2 years, I believe. And let's see, there's Redis. All right, so you can see them all here, MongoDB. Here's Apache Tinkerpop. So a lot of these are, like I said, I've never really heard of any of them, but it's amazing what's out there. Just like all the frameworks that are out there too, right? All right, it's good. Okay, time for the live demo. That's always the fun. But any questions on, if there's anybody there? All right, so I have an existing thing, and those of you who know me well, I'm a huge fan of craft beer. So what else but to have an application that a database that talks about beer. So there's a couple of things we're going to do. We can look at, that's the main application. We'll look at that later. First, we'll start with the database itself. So in here is a MongoDB database called BeersDB, as you can see right here. There are two collections. I almost said tables. So one is called, beer, and it's a very simple. It's not that, not that much on there. I mean, you can go crazy, as you can imagine. And it has, it basically has the ID, it has, the ABV, the name, the brewer ID that it corresponds. Which corresponds to the brewer collection, which I'll show you in a minute, and the beer type. So I have 12 in here at the moment. And then the brewer itself just captures, the name of the brewer, and then the city and state. And, you can imagine adding in the URL and all these other things, and, but just for simplicity, we're gonna just do it this way, right? So, so right now you'll see there's 12 beers, and there are 19 brewers. So let's just keep that in mind as we run the application, and we'll do it there. So to do the mapping, you'll notice that we have a beer class and a brewer class that correspond to those document names. So the beer class is just a simple old, Java POJO, plain old Java object. And then you have the entity annotation to define, yes, that this is an entity of a database. And then you have your annotations that describe a primary key and the various columns. So you'll see that if you saw earlier, you have the ID, the name of the beer type, and then the brewer ID. And I'll talk about what this means later, okay, since we're defining that within the column annotation. And then the ABV. And then, of course, I define, just for completeness, I combine a default constructor, the primary constructor, as I like to call it, or main constructor, so it passes in all these things, right? There is a beer type, and that's a separate enum, as you see right here. So you can see I have all the different beer types: ale, stouts, porter, and so on. So that's pretty straightforward. Should make these a little bit bigger, right? So yeah. All right. So as we go here, you have your getters and setters, and this is boring. And this is up on a GitHub repository that you can download at your leisure. I have a toString method. And this is a kind of a cool thing. I recently learned how to do this to make it sort of a builder class, to make it look like you're applying strings. And you got to define these things, right? So this is a beer builder that's nested within this class. And you actually define the methods similar to the ones that that we're talking about, right? So. And then it has the build method here. So we'll see how that works in a little while. And the same thing with Brewer. It's the same exact thing. All right. Let me show you what we're doing here with this. This is Brewer, right? Okay. So we're importing here the annotations in this case, and you notice that it's the Jakarta namespace. So it's already been updated for using that, but not everything in this application has the Jakarta namespace, but this does, and that's important. So in the past, this could have been javax.nosql.mapping, etc. And as you saw earlier in the compass in the MongoDB database, that we have the name, city, and state of the brewer itself. And again, this is default constructor, primary constructor, getters and setters, a toString method, and then the builder itself. So pretty straightforward. I think it's cool. I don't know why, maybe I'm just, I don't know. But I think it's a cool thing to do, and you'll see why in a little bit. So now we have two different ways of doing things. We can do a beer service and a brewer service, or a beer repository and a brewer repository. And we'll talk about that. So let's go ahead and look at a service. All right. So you'll notice here the inject is still Jakarta JavaX. So I'll have to experiment with this at some point to see if I can change that and if anything blows up. As a matter of fact, I had it here, and so I'm not sure what was happening. It was just going back a while. So in our service, we want to inject a database. Now you don't have to necessarily provide this. This provider attribute with the beer DB. This is more relevant if you want to work with a couple of databases. And in one of Ottavio's examples, he had one that was called Roman, one that was called Greek, and he had them specifically defined here. They were both MongoDB, but I'd be curious to see if, it's a database type, if this was a graph, for example, and this was document. And speaking of which, this is .document. You can make that it'll be, I don't think it'll be graph. It'll be column family. Come on, cap lock. Yeah, see, it says column on there, right? So you can use that, but obviously we're doing document. So that's where these are enumerations for the different database types. Just out of curiosity, let me see if graph is there. It is. Okay. Okay, I think it has to do for in the injecting the database itself. And then similarly, we had the same thing for a repository, provide that, variable. And then we have the getters for both of those. So we get that in there. So that's the service class itself. You'll see how that's used in a minute. There's a manager producer. Oh, and before I explain what this is, I should show this. This is also using MicroProfile Config. And, not only do I have the Jakarta EE banner on here, I have my MicroProfile shirt tonight. So MicroProfile is another, framework, was a set of APIs that's good for cloud native and microservices. So it is using the MicroProfile Config properties here. And so I have here, you can call this whatever you like, but this is DB1. The database is Beers DB, which obviously corresponds to this right there, right? And then a standard port for MongoDB is 27017. And then the provider, this is where you would provide this MongoDB document configuration. All right. Now you notice here it says Diana in here. All right. So that obviously, for communication, should be communication. All right. So I need to experiment with that, see if there's an updated version of that. But that's where all this is defined in here in a configurations file. So the config property. So it should be using Java X. Yeah, see, org Eclipse MicroProfile. Using the inject, all right, and the config, so config property. Okay, and you have this document collection manager, and I called it Beer Doc, and it produces, a value of type, of a document type database, and the same thing we do with the Brewer database itself. All right. And this doesn't any cleanup over here. So it closes the manager itself. Okay, so that's that. Now, let's start with a beer service. All right. We're going to inject again a DB1, right? And then we have this document template that's part of the specification. And we'll call it template. And there's an insert method. And we're basically going to return, and it accepts the beer type, right? And then the template itself will do the, apologize, will insert, that's defined in here, of course, right? And then insert that into the database itself. Now to do a query, along with the JPA and everything else, you have your find by method. So this is, find by name, find by brewer ID, and so on. All right. And here, you'd use your regular streams, right? So this is a select from, and then dot where from the name, which is passed in here. And it equals name. Actually, this equals this, right? So that's what it is. And then here's a build method as you're terminating stream. And it will call the select method with that query you just built with document query. And similarly with find by a brewer ID, the brewer ID is being passed in to the method. Of course, it's type int, and you do the same thing. So you select from beer where brewer ID equals the brewer ID being passed in here, and then you build. So that's that. Brewer service, very similar. There's an insert method. All right. And then the same thing here, it's a find by name, right? And same thing there. So pretty easy, straightforward. If there's any questions, please, slow me down somehow, or, yell out, or so something like that. You can also go to repository root. So here's our Brewer repository. Now you notice that this is an interface, and these are all declarations of methods. So we have a find all method, a find by name, and a find by brewer ID. So the interface extends the repository. That's part of the NoSQL specification. All right, we're passing in a type beer and a type string, and these are the methods. These are implemented behind the scenes for you, and this is why you get a why you get a IntelliJ IDEA has this red squiggly lines under it, and it says that a managed bean must be a concrete class or a decorator annotation. So, we can ignore that, right? So, because it obviously works. And then our Brewer repository, we're going to find all, and then just find by name. Now you can define, you can make everything you want. And this is just a demo. Depending on the database, you can define a lot more of these. And I forgot to show that you can do a delete by. You have your delete by methods as well. Okay. So, and then beer type, we did that. Brewer service. Oh, cool. I think we are ready for the main application. All right. So here is SE container. This is basically for regular Java SE, the regular JDK, to create a container without using Jakarta E at all, without using other container types. So this is quite useful, right? So we'll define a container with a small c, and we'll use that to create the service. So the service class that I showed you earlier, we'll select, and then we'll pass in the service class and .get. So if you recall, then you can get these, these methods right here, or these repositories. Okay. So that's, yeah. And then, so for beer repository, we create an instance of each. We'll use the service instance to get the beer repository, get the brewer repository. Now we have a beer service type and the brewer service, which I showed you earlier. We use the container method to do again a select, similar to up here, right? But passing in the relevant class. All right. And then the first thing I do is, in this case, is get all the elements in the database itself, and the same thing with the brewer. All right, so we'll call a brewer list. So and with that, I want to get the number of elements in each one. What's the size of that? And earlier I said there's 12 beers and 19 brewers, if I remember correctly. So in theory, when we put that out, it'll actually, we'll put that out on the screen, then it should say those numbers there. All right, so we're going to add some beers into the database here. So create our brewer instance and call it Courtyard because of the name of the beer that you may see right here. Make that a little bit bigger. And here's this builder I showed earlier, right? So we'll use the builder .id, .name, .city, .state. And these all corresponded to the builder, the nested builder class that was in the Pojo itself. So what I'm going to do is, number of brewers plus 1 to add this brewer to the database. And this is the Courtyard Brewery in New Orleans, Louisiana. They have a good selection of beers there. And then we're going to use the brewer repository in this case to save it. And we use the save method. All right. So once we build all this, we call the save method and pass in that instance of brewer. We'll do the same thing for a brewery called Miel, M-I-E-L, brewery and tap room. My wife and I discovered this one on our recent trip to New Orleans, and also quite good. And then, of course, since we want to add that to the database, we have the number of brewers plus 2. Could use plus, but just wanted to be a little bit more explicit to make sure that it works correctly. Now, in this case, you see here, this was brewer repository.save. This was brewer service.insert. So there's more than one way, to insert something into the database. And I wanted to, the idea here was to show you, how to do that. Okay, there's a way you can do things with the document template. When I first was messing around with this, it wasn't working correctly, but since then, I read up on some stuff and it was understand it a little bit better, but of course I didn't get a chance to play with that yet. So the first thing I'm going to do is get in the Brewer repository, we're going to find by name, we'll find meal, brewery, and taproom. All right. And then that should be printed, printed out on the terminal window. Then we'll get the brewer ID from this, in Brewers. And then we get the brewer ID by calling brewers.get in the first element, which should be only one anyway, right? And then we'll put that out in the window as well. Okay. So we're going to add 2 new beers from the brewer using the brewer ID. So in this case, from meal, which was the second one in there, right? So they have a new one which was just released. I don't think it was released when we were there about a week and a half ago or so. So again, we're using the number of beers plus 1, number of beers plus 2. All right. So this is an IPA. It's actually a double IPA. We'll put in the brewer ID that we got up here, and then add the ABV of 8, and then we build it. Again, we use the beer repository to save that beer we just built. And then the same thing, it's called Golden Boy, BOI, weird name, but and then this is an ale, and it's only a mild 5.0. And we'll do the same thing, except we're using brewer service.insert. So you see the difference again, right? Save versus insert. This is quite useful. I would like to see this be part of the profile for Jakarta EE10, but I'm not quite sure how much more work is really required to make that happen for next year. So. And then we're going to find by name for an existing beer. And, one of my favorites by Southern Tier is Pumpkin, which should be out right about now or next month. It's obviously a pumpkin beer. Highly recommend it. And then we're going to find varieties of beer by brewer ID, which is the one we got before. So basically what it's going to return are the 2 beers we just inserted, right? And then here's where you delete by ID. You can pass it a number, so it's straightforward there. And then you have your constructor. So are we ready to give this a try, a live demo? Everybody should be saying yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's see. I updated everything. Let's do NVM clean compile. Always a good idea. Okay. And more command lines. And since I always never want to really memorize this, so. All right, so we're going to, obviously use Maven to exec the beer app method, right, or class, I should say, and we'll let that run, and we'll look at what comes out. Assuming, okay, yeah, of course. Yeah, what did I say earlier? It worked in the first 3 times I gave this presentation, right? Oh, brother. I'm wondering, hold on a second. That's 11, it should work. It should work. I know I installed 16 more recently, but it should work. I know it has. Oh, crying out loud. The beauty of live demos. Line 21 of beerapp.java. Maybe hopefully this is a simple fix. Oh, that's weird. It isn't like this for some reason when this was working fine the whole time. And I know I didn't change this, so. Class format error. Why is this all of a sudden? For crying out loud. Let's just switch to Java 8 just to see. Yeah. Okay. Okay, now it worked. All right. All right. So before we show anything, let's refresh this. Apologize for that. I don't know what the deal was with that. Maybe it was because of Java 11. Here. So yeah, you see there's 14 beers instead of 12. We had 12 before, right? So we have here the Monstera and the Golden Boy, right? And then in Brewer, we should have 2 at the bottom here, and there's 21 now, and we had 19. You can see the rest of that I have here. So you have Courtyard and where's the other one? Oh, where's Meal? It says 21. Oh, next page. Yeah, so, yep, there it is. Okay, good. So let's take a look at the output here. All right. So originally it said 12 beers, right? This is before it inserted anything in 19, so it captured that correctly. We're finding a brewer by name, ID 21, right? Which is the meal brewing and tap room, right? And has a city and state. You notice all this is in JSON format as well. We're obtaining the brewer ID, which is 21, adding the 2 new beers. We didn't, put anything out for that, but we wanted to find a beer by name, which is Pumpkin. It's an ale, and it's ID number 1 is Southern Tier. And then we're finding varieties of beer by Brewer ID, which is our newly created ones that you see right here. So, all right, that was weird. I don't know what happened there, but all right. Any questions on any of that? Nothing in the chat, guys?
Nothing in the chat so far. Folks, if any questions you have in the chat, I'll relay them to Michael.
Okay. So either I put everybody to sleep or, hopefully not. And this is available on the GitHub page. I can show you.
Sleep is really important.
Exactly. This is true. All right, let me go back to the rest of the presentation and let's play from there. All right, so the current status, I touched on this earlier. It's in development. It's not part of the platform or web profile of Jakarta EE. I can show you the website, and it's currently considered version 1.0 beta 3. And since the plan was to migrate to JDK 11 after the release of Jakarta EE 9.1, which was at the end of May. Let's see. So here's some resources, like I said, let's cut over and go to that real quick, but it's useful to see that. And where are we here? So this is the whole list of specifications. You have the platform itself, the web profile, right, and the core profile. And that's the ones that are, the specs that are included in that. And so you can see the list of names here, Jakarta annotations, bean validation. Config is actually new. This is going to be coming from the MicroProfile config. So this is within the last 5 or 6 weeks that this work is starting to happen. All right, so just so that you know, and it looks like MicroProfile config might disappear and be under the umbrella of Jakarta config. One thing I can tell you too, that the Jakarta EE working group, is defined, is actually required by Eclipse to have a working group that defines a specification process and how to handle releases, etc. This was a Jakarta EE working group was released in 2018. The MicroProfile working group was just more recent, like maybe about a year ago in October of last year, even after 4 years of working independently. So you got dependency injection and then CDI, which is kind of interesting. I think one works off the other, something to that effect. I have to find out why that's separate like that. You have JSON processing, mail, MVC, model view controller. Here's Jakarta NoSQL. And you can see that, the spec adopters here, here's our logo and along with Sue Java. And then here you can see it's under development. And if you're interested, you can see some of the documentation, in here, also the TCK, etc. And to round out the rest of the specs, you got server faces, right? Server pages, JSP. So a lot of the things that, that were like Java server faces or JSF was now, Jakarta server faces. Again, this is because of the branding that Oracle owns the Java name. And they still support Java SE, by the way. So there is an Oracle, that'll come out. As a matter of fact, September 14th, JDK 17 will be released. The servlet specification is in here and so on. So take a look at that. It's jakarta.ee and /specifications. You can find out more at the main part of the website and, all that. I forget who wrote this one. This was probably one of the other editors, the InfoQ news piece there. There's a couple of videos. This video here, I think, featured Ottavio and someone else talk about, Jakarta NoSQL. And there was early on, if you're familiar with Baildon, he's got some outstanding tutorials on various technologies. I mean, it's not just NoSQL; it's just a whole bunch, and it's just really is awesome. I highly recommend following his tutorials. Hold on, this was going too fast there. So if you want to get involved, please contribute. You can start by, in your own GitHub repository, should you have one, fork the NoSQL repository, and that's where you can find that here. And then from there, you can do the normal open source, routine to, create a branch, push the changes to your local, GitHub, from your local machine to your GitHub, repository there, and then initiate a pull request. And then I want to really, provide acknowledgement to Ottavio Santana. He and I had a number of Zoom meetings together to talk about various things or to get me more up to speed on the specification and all that. So he's really been a great help. He's a pleasure to talk to. He and I are working together on the Jakarta One, on the program committee for this year. And that's December 7th. There's going to be a lot of great talks on that we're starting to put together. So, follow him on Twitter or, GitHub or whatever. So, and then my contact info. So if you go to my portfolio page, you'll see a link to this talk, and there's a way you can download these slides and also, go to the GitHub repository. So, and speaking of beer, thank you very much for being here tonight. And it's that time. So, so with that, let's take a look at the spreadsheet.
Mike, we switched around the spreadsheet between sentences that you did. And so I have a new spreadsheet with signups and a winner. And I can announce the winner right now.
Oh, cool. All right, good. Thank you for doing that. I normally run my random application thing, but I appreciate the help on that.
Well, we're all set tonight. The winner is the first person actually who signed up was Boris Minkin. Congratulations.
Oh, okay. We know Boris.
Send you the details for the prize after this meeting.
Yeah, or tomorrow morning, the latest. What you're going to get for
how long after this meeting?
What's that?
I didn't say how long after this meeting.
So, you know, those of you who know me well know I'm an early riser. That means I'll be probably be asleep by 9:30. So, but yeah, maybe I'll try to get that out tonight. But if you don't get it for us tonight, then definitely early tomorrow morning. Yeah, this is great. So I don't think. Oh, let me talk a little bit about. We had what's new. Oh, upcoming events. This is actually old. Oh, just want to talk about the upcoming meetings real fast here. So, okay. As I mentioned earlier tonight, we have 2 presentations next month, both on Tuesday, one the 14th, and then 2 weeks later on the 28th. We're definitely on the list for the Quarkus World Tour. It's just that they have not assigned anybody, a presenter or a topic for us just yet. And however, for the 28th, within the past week or so, maybe even a couple of weeks ago, we do have Simon Ritter, who you all know is I think with Azul, and his talk is going to be "Are all OpenJDK builds created equal?" For those of you who may not know, so OpenJDK obviously is the open source version of Oracle's JDK, and then there are downstream distributions, with like open source, and so Azul is one of them. They used to call it Zool, but I think they had some name changes more recently. But there's also Amazon Corretto has their own thing, and even more recently, within the last few months, Microsoft build of OpenJDK. If you've been following along, Microsoft has really gotten themselves involved in the Java space over the past couple of years. They have their Azure cloud offering, and there's a lot of Java involved with that. So they're obviously competing with Google Cloud Platform and the Spring. I forget what you call that one. Their Spring Cloud, whatever that's called, et cetera. So they're getting themselves involved in a lot of things. They're, as I mentioned, the working groups before, there was an initiative called the Adopt OpenJDK that was formed about 4 years ago. They were involved, they got themselves under the Eclipse Foundation, and they created a working group called Adoptium. So it's a new name if you've heard of that one before. And Microsoft is one of the founding members of that. So like I said, they're not only just, building stuff, but they're getting involved in a lot of these other initiatives. So it's kind of interesting to see because, over the years, Microsoft was, not too interested in Java. They had their J# about 20 years ago, I think, if I remember correctly. For those of us old enough to remember. But yeah, so anyway, so that's the reason I'm rambling is because, all these downstream distributions, are different in some way. I believe one of them supports Java FX. The Java FX was taken out, I believe, within the last couple of JDK versions. But one of them might actually include it in there. So this is sort of a preamble to what you might want to hear next month. So I'd be actually interested in learning a little bit more. And then in October, we have Java Web Tokens, a JWT, and what Java developers need to know. And this is by Dan Moore. And I think he was part of the Connecticut group. If I remember correctly, I'd have to double check that, but he introduced himself to me and was interested in presenting. So JWTs are interesting. Had the opportunity to hear more about it at Code 1 2 years ago. David Blevins from Tommy Tribe gave a great talk on how all that works together. So these are the 3 upcoming meetings within the next 2 months. We still need to figure out November and December to round out the rest of this year. But if you're on my distribution list, you'll hear more about it. And also on our website, and we got the ground rules. Okay, got that. You will see in our meetings section. So you'll always see what's coming up next down here. All right. So we'll have that set. And then our meetings page will have the upcoming meetings. As you see here, so I'll update this now to get rid of that. And you'll have links to, to register if we've already defined all those. And then if you've never been here before, there's a list of all the meetings we've had over the past 20 years. So it's a nice historical archive that we have here together. So you can read about our sponsors, about us, about the directors and the leaders of our group. And if you peruse our page there. So with that, if there are no questions, I think we can probably call this a night. Anybody else? No other questions?
Nothing else that I can see on the chat.
Okay. So reach out to me. If you want to, if you're interested in presenting, for example, you can send an email to us at info@gsjug.org. It goes to all of us on the team here, and just let us know. Give us an idea for an abstract or something like this. So we're more than happy to have folks talk.
We do have a question. For people who are looking to contribute, where are the biggest needs?
Oh, okay. Right now, documentation is a big one. So I've been contributing to that. There are numerous chapters, and as far as code, I know looking through the API docs, I know some of the descriptions could be a little bit better in my humble opinion. Things like that. In terms of JDK 11 stuff, I'd have to reach out to Ottavio to get a better idea where they are on the code itself. So if you want to reach out to me, Mike@redlich.net. As a reminder to reach out to Ottavio, I can get an answer for you. No. So I hope you found this useful. I'm excited about it. I like working with database applications. I've done that for a number of years. For MySQL, MySQL databases, for example, I've had some applications using Spring Data, for example. That's something I've messed around with in the past. But so this is a bit of a passion of mine, and which is part of the reason why we adopted the spec. So let me stop sharing here. So with that, I guess, Barry, we can call it a night.
We can indeed.
All right. Folks, thanks again for coming out. We hope to see you on September 14th and the 28th, and we'll enjoy the rest of your summer.